We turn now to our political panel. Jerry Seib is the Washington bureau chief for the Wall Street Journal. Jamelle Bouie is the chief political correspondent for Slate magazine. Nancy Cordes is our CBS News congressional correspondent, and we welcome Ben Domenech to the show. He's the publisher of The Federalist. Jerry, I want to start with you. Donald Trump had a little trouble with Hugh Hewitt. Based on the way things have been going, his poll numbers will only increase.
Probably so. Exactly. I mean, I think Newt Gingrich was right. I don't think that sort of thing matters all that much. The Trump candidacy is about leadership, not about issues. But I do think there's a bit of a problem there, which is that the sleeper issue in this campaign, I think, really is national security. It's a dangerous world. People are frightened. The question then becomes, do you trust the person to lead in a dangerous world? And that's a question more of demeanor than issues or policy. Ronald Reagan would not have done well on that test, but he had the right demeanor. People trusted him. That's the question for Trump, not does he know the names.
Right, temperament question. Ben, in conservative circles, there have been opponents of Trump who have tried to grab one of these moments and said, aha, you see, here's the... But it hasn't worked. Is there an emerging case that, or does this provide an opportunity among conservatives to come at Trump?
I really don't think that it does. The fact is that condescension from political elites, even within the Republican Party, is actually now something that entirely accrues to Trump's benefit, because people who support him interpret it as condescension directed toward them. And their general attitude, I think, is, to Jerry's point, not so much a sophisticated knowledge of the various names of people operating within foreign policy or national security, but just will this person do the right thing when the moment calls for it? And I think that that's something that Trump really stands up and delivers. He could actually stand on national television in front of a map of Iran and just make exploding noises for 15 minutes, and it would amount to a more credible and, I think, sophisticated view of foreign policy and national security than Republicans have heard from many of their leaders for years.
Jamelle, what do you make of this? Is any other candidate in the Republican field have a chance to take advantage of this foreign policy angle?
I think perhaps Rubio does, since this is an area of his expertise. And I think of all the candidates, Rubio is probably the one who's best positioned to be acceptable to everyone. And so if Trump declines over the next couple of months, I think when Trump declines over the next couple of months, Rubio will be...
That is not inevitable.
But I think that's going to happen. I think Rubio is well positioned to sort of show himself as the person who can really capitalize on this underlying issue of national security.
And that's his argument, which is you got to know some stuff. You can make decisions between option A and B, but if you don't know option C exists out there. Right. Nancy, Hillary Clinton, who you spend some time thinking about, how do they see Donald Trump? I heard about a group of Clinton fundraisers together at a party, and all they apparently were talking about was Donald Trump.
Well, I think her concern and the campaign's concern when it comes to Donald Trump is that he makes everyone else in the field look mainstream, and they are trying to get the message out there that when it comes to issues like Planned Parenthood, immigration, that a lot of the Republican field is right there with Donald Trump when it comes to policy. But they're afraid that to the average voter, they see Donald Trump's positions and then they see someone like Jeb Bush and they're going to say, oh, you know, he's right down the middle. That's great. An independent voter might like that. And so they're really engaged in trying to show that when it comes to policy, the Republican candidates are more alike than different.
I think the RNC actually handed those Democrats a tool with that pledge, right? The pledge asking all candidates to support the eventual nominee. Now, next year, you know, Jeb Bush has signed it. I think a few others signed it. Trump signed it, obviously. You can very easily say it to, you know, any Republican who's nominee next year. Well, you said you'd support Trump. Do you support these things that Trump said?
What do you make of the pledge, Jerry?
Look, I think Reince Priebus had a really good week, the Republican National Committee chairman. I mean, first of all, he works behind the scenes to get Carly Fiorina, your previous guest, in the second debate, which was a big deal. I think having her on the outside would have looked bad.
And her on the main stage of that debate.
On the main stage of the main debate. I actually think that getting the pledge signed was a real plus, because it takes an elephant out of the room for Republicans. This was a problem. It created a lot of uncertainty. Donors were saying to the Republican National Committee, well, I'm not going to give you a bunch of money if somebody from within the party is going to blow it up after I do that.
Blow it up by running as an independent.
By running as an independent, and this creates a little bit more calm for the time being until the next phase. But for now, I think that was a big deal.
Although there's nothing binding about it. And Donald Trump can certainly, a couple months from now, say, well, they didn't live up to their end of the bargain, or I don't think that the person who's the nominee is going to go the distance, so I've got no choice but to become an independent.
A good negotiator would never be so bound. Ben, you wrote about the threat that Trump poses to the Republican Party. What did you mean?
Well, I think that there is a real threat that Trump poses, and that is namely that he has tapped into a group of Americans who feel that the large elites of both parties have ignored their priorities, that they are out of step with them, not just on immigration, but on trade, and certainly on the priorities that they have when it comes to politics. This is a disaffected group of people. And what you see typically when you look at these polls is that Trump performs the best among people who have not typically voted in primaries before. That to me is dangerous for a number of reasons, but particularly because we've seen the path in Europe that happens when parties turn towards populism, nativism, nationalism, xenophobia, things of that nature. And I think that the danger for the Republican Party right now is that Trump is speaking for a group of people. He is their avatar in a way that I think a lot of other political candidates are not, in opposition to the priorities of the Republican leadership in Washington. And I think that his effect on the Republican Party could be tangible regardless of whether he wins the nomination or not. He really does speak for those people.
Jerry, what do you make of Jeb Bush has tried to pick up a little bit on what Ben's talking about. This week he amped up his attacks. Aide to Governor Bush said, we're going to fight for it now. How's that fight going?
Well, I think it's problematic, but I do think they're better off fighting than not fighting because it's a two-way flow here. Donald Trump is attacking Jeb Bush more than anybody else, which says to me that if you're in Donald Trump's world, you look at the establishment group, and that's really what everybody else is outside of Ben Carson and Carly Fiorina, they still think Jeb Bush is the most likely alternative to emerge from that establishment group, and therefore you have to take him down starting now. So I think it's a two-way street. I think Jeb Bush decides you look weak if you don't fight, and the Trump world looks at Jeb Bush and says, well, he's the most likely anti-Trump candidate, so we better go after him now.
Jamelle, what do you make of the other non-Trump candidates and how that all sorts out?
You know, I'm looking at the sort of the establishment group, and that's Jeb Bush, that's Rubio, that's Kasich, that's I think Scott Walker to a certain extent, that's Chris Christie to a certain extent. And of those people, like I said earlier, I think Rubio is the one who is going to potentially do best. You know, Scott Walker, it's really striking to see how much Trump has completely demolished Scott Walker's standing in Iowa and New Hampshire nationally. I mean, 6 months ago, we were all talking about Scott Walker as someone who is going to be the alternative to Bush or the alternative to Rubio, but it looks like he's diminished from the field entirely.
And I think that that's in part because he's just not a compelling candidate when he's out there. I mean, for people who feel like the system is rigged, who feel like people are ignoring their priorities, Donald Trump is their golden-haired Adonis who will turn winter into spring. He is their hero, their champion. And they're perfectly happy having a champion who's inconsistent on all these different areas of policy when it comes to entitlements, fiscal conservatism, anything else. As long as he is someone who speaks to their priorities, he fights. And that's what they care about.
And that's what Newt Gingrich was talking about. New news out of New Hampshire, an NBC Marist poll has Bernie Sanders 9 points ahead of Hillary Clinton. Respond to that, but also Hillary Clinton spent the week talking about her emails again.
Huge reversal in this poll from just a couple of months ago. And so I reached out to both campaigns this morning to see what they think. So striking. Bernie Sanders' campaign says this just shows that the more people get to know Bernie Sanders, the more they like him. Hillary Clinton's campaign didn't address the poll numbers directly, but said we're very confident in the organization that we're building in New Hampshire, which is code for, okay, he may get a lot of enthusiasm. He's from neighboring Vermont. He's doing these feel-good rallies. But at the end of the day, we're going to have the operation to get people to the polls in New Hampshire and elsewhere.
Jerry, on the emails this week, Hillary Clinton's camp and she herself seemed to take it more seriously. There were jokes about it in kind of the previous week. Now it seems to be more serious, even calling up some fundraisers to the headquarters to talk to them.
Yeah, I think they decided that they needed to have a different approach, and I thought the interview with Andrea Mitchell was a sign of that. In other words, to sit down and have what they knew was going to be a prolonged conversation about this issue. And I actually thought it worked pretty well. I kind of wondered, well, like, why doesn't she do 3 or 4 of these a week? Because the best way to show that you're not being secretive and evasive is to act like you're not being secretive and evasive. And I thought that interview was a pretty effective way of doing it. So I suspect we're in a new phase more broadly in their attempts to address this issue.
Chris Christie basically, once giving advice to Hillary Clinton, said basically she needed to do what he did, which is just stand out there and take questions until people have stopped being able to answer them. Jamelle, there's discontent in the Democratic. There's always discontent, right? Not just with Democrats, but you know, where there's always, you can write a story, so-and-so is discontented. But do Democrats, the discontent I hear is with the handling of this. Yes. Do they have a case?
I think they do have a case. Obviously, I don't think Clinton knew if she was running for president in 2009 when this email server was created. But I do think that Hillary Clinton should know that she is among the most watched people in American politics, if not the world, and that if she had an inkling of maybe she'll run for president in the future, to have not done this. It doesn't necessarily mean that the email server is illegal or criminal or anything. It's just, I think, bad political judgment from someone who really should know better. And I think what grates Democrats is the "you should know better" fact of all of this.
I think the attitude among Republicans, certainly in 2008, many Republicans, was that Hillary Clinton was someone who was a more responsible and more trusted person when it came to just the responsibility of governance, and that was something that they understood even within the context of the Democratic primary. I think now this is a revelatory moment for a lot of people because you knew this was going to be an issue, yet you still continue to do this. The questions being raised now about the staffer that she employed that may raise all sorts of ethical questions that the Congress is only just beginning to look into. I think this is going to continue to be a story, and that she does need to engage in that kind of open approach to answering questions.
It's actually slightly worse because the cynics are now saying she did this precisely because she knew she was going to run for president. So that's a no-win situation.
Nancy, you were with Joe Biden this week. I want to talk about him quickly before we end. He talked about whether he would run or not. Very emotional. Very
emotional, raw, anguished. He did not look like someone who is ready to make a decision one way or the other anytime soon. He said he's trying to figure out if he has the emotional energy to run. But I talked to someone very close to him this weekend who said, as far as they know, he is still on the same timetable, which is that he will make a decision by the end of the summer. And the autumnal equinox is now 16 and a half days away. So whether he's ready to make that decision or not, you know, time's a-ticking.
Getting very Stonehenge-y with the autumnal equinox. Jerry, do you think he can... what's your assessment of
Well, what Joe Biden is selling is authenticity because he's not a polished guy, and this seems to be a cycle in which authenticity actually works, so that's going for him, I think. I think the problem he's got is that, you know, Iowa and New Hampshire, as Nancy was saying, are places where organization really matters. He's got nothing going there. And he gets to the South after that, and that's a place where the large minority African-American vote is very, very heavily favors Hillary Clinton, and that's a bit of a problem. So he's got to find a path, and it's not actually obvious what that path is.
It's not clear that path can be on the issues either, because on economic issues, he's not really that far from Hillary Clinton whatsoever. And on issues that might appeal to African-American voters in the South, he has this long history of being essentially a drug warrior. And he's very vulnerable to that if it comes up in the context of a primary.
He does have deep ties, though, in South Carolina. He vacations there. He knows a lot of people there. In fact, those are some of his strongest supporters, pushing him to run.
Sorry, we're going to have to leave it there, Nancy. Thanks so much to all of you. We'll be right back in a moment.